with that, also talk about the second leg of the relegation playoffs. Hamburg do not go up. But before we talk about Hamburg and Stuttgart is in a similar vein than Frankfurt, I feel, with many ways. And, we need to talk about Sebastian Hoeneß and the fantastic job he has done. We need to talk about Hamburg and what's next. But, wow, the Volkspark yesterday, Stefan, the atmosphere was incredible. And if Hamburg had gone up, which they didn't, they would have to thank the fans. It was incredibly loud. And when the game was over and Hamburg did not go up and lost the game quite decisively, no one left. For good 15, 20 minutes, nobody left. They just stayed and they applauded the team, and there was no violence. There was no, the kind of whistles that you hear. There was no sense of huge disappointment. It was just in appreciation for fans what the players have done this season. And I thought that was astonishing. And I think it really deserves mentioning because we've seen it, especially before COVID. Maybe this is something that happened during COVID, that fans finally learn how to appreciate what they have by being able to go to stadiums. But we've seen games like that go really bad, right? Where the team that did not go up or the team that got relegated, where fans rioted, we had nothing even close to it. And I actually thought the interaction between the two fan groups in a game that means a lot was really positive as well. I traveled with the fans with the train to the respective games, and there were a lot of Stuttgart fans in Hamburg. There were a lot of Hamburg fans in Stuttgart, and they interacted very peacefully. So I want to just point that out before we go next, because the fans in and around Germany over these three massive games have been very impressive. With that in mind, Stuttgart stay up, and Stefan, based on their run of form over the last 8 games, where they're actually 5th in the Bundesliga standings, only, let me get it straight out of my head, Leipzig, Dortmund, Bayern, and Köln were better during that stretch. I think it was always going to be a really tough task for HSV to get something out of this, and after losing the first leg 3-0 to go overturn this, I think, against a very good Stuttgart side that also came into this game in a really strong form.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we talked about this actually on the kind of bonus show, which we did after the first leg, in the sense that you kind of can't help but sympathise with Hamburg in the sense that they are kind of ultimately victims of circumstance here. Usually they'd be coming up against a Bochum or an Augsburg, for example, or maybe even Schalke to an extent. But because of the manner in which Stuttgart managed to get themselves into the relegation spot, thanks Bruno Labbadia, and then kind of drag themselves out of it through some outstanding coaching from Sebastian Hoeneß. I think I tweeted after the game that they've only lost 2 of their 12 games since Hoeneß came into. I mean, we're talking about like the equivalent of like Pep Guardiola just taking over a relegation team and just turning it around overnight. And I do mean that comparison. I'll go on to explain maybe why in a couple of minutes. But yeah, so over the course of these two legs, it was basically Hamburg playing a top half Bundesliga team, maybe even a top 8 team in terms of man for man quality. And it definitely showed. Stuttgart blew them away in the first leg at the Mercedes-Benz Arena in Stuttgart. And then, although Hamburg started really well in this game, Kittel scores an outstanding finish, 6 minutes into the game. The crowd are going wild. It still felt like a game in which you could see Hamburg pushing, and actually we saw this in the first leg as well, actually, in the sense that Hamburg were desperate to kind of keep pushing forward and scoring goals, and Stuttgart were just happy to pick them off. And I think that's ultimately kind of what stood out to me over the course of both legs, in the sense that you have this Hamburg side who are used to being one of the biggest teams in the division, well, arguably the biggest division team in this Zweite Bundesliga, obviously. But I mean, in terms of like quality on the pitch, they're also used to kind of dominating games, used to dominating possession, used to being expected to win games. And this is the kind of tricky thing about playoff games, and it's not just a Bundesliga thing, it's not just a German football thing. It's an issue that I think we have in general, where you pit one of the best teams from the second division against one of the worst teams from the top division, because you've got, all of a sudden, you've got a team that are used to going all out to win games, having to actually play as the underdog. And that's something that I think Hamburg really struggled with over the course of both legs because, I tweeted this during the game as well, and it's a kind of pet peeve of mine, and it's something that kind of just manifested and just kind of continued to kind of grow arms and legs over the course of the match and kind of really annoyed me from the first to the 90th minute in the sense that, obviously there's such a huge emphasis on teams being possession based, on being sleek counter-attacking teams, on being able to pass the ball out of the back of the net, back of the defence. And it's a style of football that has kind of permeated throughout the whole of, professional football. In just about every country, you see teams in the second, third tiers. As long as they've got decent football pitches, there will always be a team trying to play the kind of possession-based football. And I think that's fine when you are the best team in the division because you can just pass around the other teams because by nature you have better players. But for a team like Hamburg, who are coming into this game against a much better technical team, it just meant that they had no chance. And as I tweeted during the game, like Hamburg spent most of this game putting out fires that their own fullback started because they just didn't know how to do anything except try to pass the ball through Stuttgart, and it just didn't work over and over again. And I think you made a really good point about this in the kind of our Substacks thread. We were talking to subscribers about it, and you kind of drew the comparison to Schalke, who got promoted by playing a far more basic, not so much Route 1 football, but a far more pragmatic style of football. And, it's up to, at the end of the day, it's up to football fans. They pay the money to go to these games. They buy the season tickets. They get to cheer on the club or boo them or decide who gets to be the head coach, etc. But if I was a fan of one of these clubs who's kind of yo-yoing between the Zweite Bundesliga and the Bundesliga, I'd much rather my club played the kind of football that Schalke played because it just sets you up far better to kind of deal with matches like this. Now, I know listeners are probably saying, well, Schalke just got relegated, so what the hell do you know? But, and it's a fair point, but I think Thomas Rice...
But they will get promoted straight away again.
Yeah, well, they probably will.
Right,
It'll be interesting to see how they compare because Hamburg, I think they announced they're going to keep their head coach on for next season, so they're probably going to stick with this tactic, and it'll be interesting to see how they compare to Schalke next season because I just think unless you are Bayern Munich or Dortmund or Leipzig, you should be able to play a more pragmatic defensive style of football because at the end of the day, and I've kind of talked about this before when I've gone off on rants about gegenpressing, if you're one of the poorer teams in division and you're playing the same type of football and the same tactics as the best team in the division, 9 out of 10 times you're never going to beat them because you're both playing with the same set of cards, but they've got better players. So that's what kind of stood out to me in this game. I don't really want to kind of beat up on Hamburg too much because I feel really bad that they didn't get promoted. And like I said, I don't think the Bundesliga is quite the Bundesliga without them, to be perfectly honest with you. But it's something that I've noticed throughout German football, not just German football, across our divisions. But it'll be interesting to see how they respond to this and what happens next season. But yeah, I'm sure we'll do a lot more on Hamburg this summer, and what kind of happens next for them. But for now, I guess they just kind of have to go home and lick their wounds, don't they?
Yeah, so my next week's newsletter is on HSV, which because I've got a lot of quotes and I talked to some people here in Hamburg, and like over the next few days I'm here, so I want to do some more on that. And kind of makes sense, right? To do that. I have a lot of thoughts on HSV. You already alluded to it. I did say some of it already in our Substack chat to our subscribers. I think one of the big issues with HSV is that it is the club of merchants and bankers. It is, and there is another team in Hamburg, St. Pauli, that is the team of the harbor workers in the red light district. St. Pauli can play that dirty kind of football because their clientele is okay with it. Hamburg SV is a team of rich people. It's a team of people that have success in their lives, and it's a team that has a very similar kind of fan base than Bayern Munich. And that comes with a certain amount of expectations, and that comes also with a certain cultural set. And that cultural set doesn't translate well to the second Bundesliga. Fans there will have a very hard time accepting that their team is one of, grizzled defenders and hardworking defensive midfielders like Union Berlin had when they went up, right? And that is, I think, a huge problem for them because, like, as you said, when they play good football in the second Bundesliga, and this year, I mean, it's cruel, but they're the best not promoted second Bundesliga side in history with 66 points. And, any other year they probably would have gone up. But unfortunately for them, that style of, and they're not learning because they've done it now for 5 years, it just doesn't work in clutch games in this division. The second Bundesliga is, in my opinion, one of the best second divisions in the world. It's probably a top 10 league in Europe, right? The only other second division I think that is in that same category is the Championship in England. But even in England, you look at the Championship, you can't play pretty football every game. It doesn't, you're not going to get away with it. And I think that is something that, from a cultural aspect, a lot of people in and around Hamburg are still struggling with, right? Because they feel like that and I mean, they're right, they are probably the second or third or fourth biggest team in Germany. They are a team that historically in the 80s and 90s were seen as a natural competitor for Bayern Munich. It's kind of like that north-south counterpoint.
Could I just add another comparison? We talked about a moment ago, but Schalke. If you look at the way that Thomas Reis's Schalke team played this season, very hard-working, a lot of water carriers, in the sense that there's no kind of real, except maybe like Salazar or something, there's not really a lot of smart technical players. It's all very hard-working players. And Schalke fans love that because, it's a very kind of, working-class town. It's an old mining town, as we all know. The club obviously take a lot of honor, a lot of pride in that. But culturally, that means those fans far more comfortable with 11 players on the pitch just running into the ground for them. And as you said, that's such a stark contrast to Hamburg, where you walk down the kind of gold-plated streets and there's like Armani shops and Dolce Gabbana, whatever you want to call it. Very different from the St. Pauli region of Hamburg, but for people who've never maybe been to Hamburg, it is technically one of the richest places in Germany. It's got one of the highest GDPs per square mile. Which seems like a very German thing to know, but I do seem to know that. So yeah, it's chalk and cheese, and it's a really interesting point that you make actually about maybe culturally they're not really prepared to roll up their sleeves and put in the hard work that a team like Schalke or Bochum have done in recent years.
Well, St. Pauli this year, right? St. Pauli too. Like they understand the league much better, and it's. I think it's a really tricky thing for them because I think that once they do get out of this division, and I'm certain of this, they'll be fine. They get out of the second Bundesliga, and they'll probably do what Stuttgart or Frankfurt have done when they went back up, and be just fine. It's just getting out of this division can be really difficult, and especially if you don't have the right cultural mindset. And I really like Tim Walton and glad he's staying, and I think that he is the right coach. And I think that if they play the same season as this year, they probably go up because you're not gonna get not promoted with the best point total for a non-promotion side twice in a row. No one is that unlucky. Maybe Hasbro will be, but technically no one is this unlucky. And I do think that if they draw some right conclusions from this season, that they will be in a good place. And I have to say, I'm really impressed by how they closed their ranks by not being promoted. There was no, we have to change everything, which I think actually would be the wrong thing to do because I talked to my colleagues here in Hamburg and they're like, well, we changed everything every year. Every year we changed it and it didn't work. And when you actually look at the season on balance, they played a really good season in the second division. And so maybe not changing something is actually the right thing to do because if they play the same season again, they'll get promoted. So I guess I'm like the roll-back guy rather than the rebuild guy in this conversation. But they will have to do some couple of small things. They will have to bring in some grizzled veteran presence that can just help this team get over the line.